You arrive in the Pacific not with a crash of shells, but with heat, a dense, salt-heavy warmth that hangs over the water like breath that never fully exhales. The lagoon is impossibly blue at first glance, almost gentle, and for a moment you could mistake this for just another island in a chain of distant specks scattered across an endless ocean. But the closer you drift, the more the cracks show. The water churns with the wake of landing craft, the reef glints like a hidden blade beneath the surface, and the air carries a taste of metal that has nothing to do with the sea. Before we begin, a soft invitation. If you find peace in these quiet retellings, in these slow journeys through history, you're welcome to subscribe. It helps this channel reach more listeners looking for calm, reflective stories like this one. No pressure, just gratitude if you choose to join us. You're listening to Echoes of War. What will become the battle for Tarawa begins not with noise, but uncertainty. Men wait in cramped transports, gripping rifles slick with sweat, listening to the distant thump of naval guns softening the island. Officers trace maps, rehearsing movements they know will dissolve the moment boots meet coral. Somewhere under the palms ahead lies BTO, the tiny island fortress the Japanese command has spent months turning into a tangle of trenches, blockhouses, and interlocking fields of fire. An island they claim could not be taken with 1,000,000 men in 100 years. From above, BTO almost looks peaceful, a thin strip of sand ringed with surf and dotted with palms swaying in slow, indifferent arcs. But nothing on this island moves without intention. Beneath that quiet line of green, the bunkers crouch like sealed jaws. Sentries wait inside dark firing slits. Mortars rest in pits carved by hands that knew this day would come. Every piece of this place is designed to slow, to stop, to break whatever tries to cross the reef. You watch the Marines shift their weight as dawn deepens into a soft, gold-washed morning. Many have heard of the reef but don't yet understand its shape, how shallow the water will become at the worst possible moment, how the tide will betray them, how the boats meant to carry them to shore will grind to a halt far from the sand. None of that is clear yet. For now, they are only waiting, and waiting is its own kind of burden. This will not be a long battle, but it will be a heavy one. 3 days compressed into something that feels much larger, a storm of confusion, bravery, exhaustion, and bitter lessons learned in real time. The palms will burn. The sand will scorch, and the lagoon will fill with stories that drift long after the guns fall silent. The reef that waited. The morning begins with a kind of stillness that feels deceptive, like the ocean is holding its breath. Above the lagoon, the light is pale and thin, drifting across the water in long, wavering ribbons. From afar, BTO looks almost untouched, a sandbar wrapped in bright turquoise, palm crowns swaying in slow, thoughtful arcs. But as you draw nearer, the details sharpen. The charred shapes along the shoreline, the irregular shadows beneath the palms, the faint geometry of trenches cut into the earth. Inside the landing craft, the Marines shift in tight rows, pressed shoulder to shoulder. Helmets bump, elbows nudge, packs dig into ribs. Most of them say nothing. The engine's low vibration fills the silence, a steady hum that works its way into their bones. They've been briefed, shown diagrams, told what to expect, but the human mind always edits the frightening parts, smoothing edges, softening the contours of things not yet faced. The real reef is not soft. The real reef is not an idea on a map. It is a body of coral shaped over centuries, jagged, immovable, and waiting. You drift above the water, watching the column of landing craft push forward. Their wakes carve pale scars across the lagoon. The sun glints off steel helmets and the dull backs of rifles held upright between knees. Somewhere farther out, the naval guns thunder again, low, rolling bursts that vibrate the air even at this distance. Each blast sends a rippling pulse across the lagoon, spreading outward until it breaks softly against the hull of every boat. For now, BTO remains largely hidden behind smoke and distance. What the Marines can see is limited, just the faint outline of palms, and occasionally, a burst of sand thrown upward by an impact inland. Beyond that, the island feels like a silhouette with secrets, and inside each boat, men chase their own thoughts through narrow corridors. The weight of gear, the itch of sweat beneath webbing, the dryness of their mouths, the tension that settles when the unknown begins to draw its first clear lines. There is a particular kind of fear that grows in confined spaces, one that has little room to disperse. It sits behind the ribs and waits. Some men try to ignore it by tightening straps or checking ammunition. Others stare at the water, watching how the sunlight flickers like a broken signal beneath the surface. A few let their eyes drift toward the sky, tracing the slow arc of circling planes. Everyone knows the reef will play a role today, but few understand how deeply it will shape the hours ahead. The tide is wrong, not that anyone in these boats realizes it yet. Charts suggested something different. Calculations pointed to deeper channels. But the ocean has its own schedule, indifferent to plans drawn far from here. What waits under the water is not a helpful guide but a barrier, hard and unyielding, carved with edges that can slice through the bottom of a craft or halt it altogether. What waits under the water is a truth that can only be learned the moment you collide with it. Ahead, BTO grows clearer. The first traces of sand appear through the haze, pale, narrow, fragile. But the closer you look, the more the contradictions unfold. The palms sway gently, and yet their trunks hide machine gun nests. The shoreline seems soft, yet bristles with obstacles angled outward. The island looks quiet, yet nothing about it has been quiet for months. And the reef lies between them and the sand like a final threshold. Lines drawn in water and sand. The closer the landing craft push toward BTO, the more the island reveals its true shape. What once seemed like a thin, pale strip of sand now resolves into something far denser, a compact fortress pressed flat against the horizon. You notice the way the palms are spaced in oddly regular intervals, not by nature's hand but by deliberate clearing. The shadows between their trunks are unnaturally dark, almost geometric. Each one marks the mouth of a trench, a dugout, or a bunker carved into the island like ribs beneath taut skin. From the ocean side, the Japanese defenses do not announce themselves loudly. They whisper through structure, slanted log walls half buried beneath sand, thick embrasures disguised behind fronds, lines of barbed wire sunk below the tide so that only the faintest glint betrays them. Somewhere inland, men sit in those narrow spaces, waiting behind heavy doors of steel and concrete, their rifles angled down fixed lines of fire laid out months ago with mathematical precision. The fortress breathes quietly, as if holding its strength in reserve. The Marines cannot see those shapes clearly yet. What they do see, what they cannot ignore, is the surf becoming brighter and shallower ahead. The water shifts from deep blue to green to a pale, crystalline clarity that reveals the first teeth of the reef. Some of the men lean forward, squinting, trying to gauge distance, depth, danger. None of them speak the thought forming in their minds. This looks too shallow. The coxswains press on. Orders are orders. Behind them, the naval barrage eases into a lower, slower rhythm, giving the impression that something is about to change. Smoke drifts over the lagoon like drifting curtains, thick in some places, almost transparent in others, fluttering with each distant concussion. The sky is a hard, brilliant blue, the kind that makes everything appear sharper, as though the world has lowered its eyelids and begun to stare back. In one of the boats, a Marine adjusts the strap of his pack again. He doesn't realize he's been doing it over and over. The motion is automatic, a small, repetitive effort to exert control over anything at all. His rifle stock thumps softly against his leg. His boots are not meant for wading through water this long. None of this was meant for the reef. But those realizations arrive slowly, almost gently, like a tide lapping against the side of the mind before it pulls at something deeper. Across the formation, officers lean close to the bows, trying to read the water ahead. Some glance back at the destroyers and battleships behind them, watching the guns fall silent for a moment before another volley rolls out. The bombardment looks decisive from a distance, plumes of dust rising in dozens of places, clouds of debris lifting into the air. But the island is small, the bunkers deep, and BTO has been engineered with a simple belief: survive the storm, then strike when the boats come close. And now the boats are close. You drift above the leading wave of landing craft as they approach the edge of the reef. Beneath them, coral forms a broad ridge in the shape of a blunt crescent, its surface uneven and jagged. The water that covers it is shallow, barely shoulder-high in some places, waist-deep in others. A few coxswains try to angle left or right, hoping to find a deeper lane, but there is no simple path. The ocean floor rises with stubborn determination. The first landing craft reaches the reef and slows abruptly, too abruptly. The hull strikes coral with a jarring scrape, and the boat shudders, rocking forward before settling crookedly. A few Marines brace themselves instinctively, grabbing whatever is closest. No one needs to say what that sound means. It is the sound of steel meeting immovable stone. More boats run up beside it, each one grinding to a halt. Engines strain. Propellers churn water into froth. Coxswains shout commands over the roar, trying to maneuver their craft off the ridge, but each movement seems to wedge them deeper. The men inside shift, adjusting to the new angle, realizing that the shoreline is still far ahead, too far for a simple dash. This is the moment when the reef stops being a feature on a map and becomes the first true battlefield of Tarawa. The realization settles into the Marines like a weight. They will have to climb out. They will have to wade. They will have to cross the remaining distance through open water with packs, rifles, ammunition, and the burden of uncertainty pressing down on every step. Waves slap against the sides of the stranded boats. BTO waits behind a veil of smoke, its bunkers quiet, too quiet, as if the island is exhaling before the first sharp breath of the fight. The lines have been drawn, not in sand, but in water. The long walk through open water. The order to disembark spreads not through shouted commands at first, but through the subtle ripple of movement inside each stranded landing craft. Marines begin shifting forward, adjusting their packs, checking the straps of their rifles, preparing themselves for something they had hoped to avoid. The coxswains raise their hands, signaling that the boats can go no farther. The reef has made the decision for everyone. You hover above the scene as ramp latches rattle open. The sound is dull and heavy, swallowed almost immediately by the roar of surf and the distant, rhythmic echo of naval guns. When the first ramps drop, there is a brief moment of hesitation, a breath held collectively, before the men step out into the lagoon. The water swallows them in a rush. Some sink to their chests. Others stagger as coral scrapes their boots. Packs drag them sideways, pulling their weight toward one shoulder. Rifles are lifted high, held above the surface like lanterns in a flooded corridor. The lagoon looks calm from afar, but inside it the footing is treacherous, the current patient and persistent. From the island, there is still no gunfire. BTO watches in silence as the first wave of Marines forms a loose, wavering line across the shallows. They begin moving forward, each step a negotiation with the unseen ridges of the reef. Some stumble immediately, catching their boots on jagged coral. Others lean forward, pushing through with determined, short strides. The water glitters around them with a deceptive gentleness that does nothing to ease the weight each man carries. Behind them, More boats strike the reef and stall. Ramps drop. Marines spill into the water in staggered intervals, turning the lagoon into a wide scattering of figures pushing toward a shore that still feels impossibly far. The distance is not measured just in meters, but in the growing awareness of vulnerability, the realization that the ocean, for all its beauty, offers no cover. The soundscape shifts. The naval barrage continues, but the gaps between the explosions feel longer. The echoes dissipate more quickly. It's as though the island is drawing its breath, waiting for the moment when the Marines move just a little farther, just close enough. You drift lower, watching one group wade through chest-deep water. Their faces are set in a kind of determined blankness, not fear exactly, but the focus required to suppress it. Each step feels measured, deliberate. Some glance over their shoulders to check the distance to their boat. Others look only forward, locking their attention onto the thin line of sand and palms ahead. The water begins to shallow slightly as they move farther from the reef. But the relief is short-lived. The ground rises unevenly, forming sudden mounds and hollows. Some men lurch as the depth changes abruptly. A few lose their balance and fall, going under for a moment before clawing their way upright with gasping breaths. Nearby Marines reach out to steady them without a word. Still, the island remains silent. If the men hoped the bombardment had broken the Japanese defenders, the quiet now feels unsettling. No island this heavily fortified stays silent without intent. Something inside the bunkers is shifting, aligning, preparing. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, the atmosphere changes. Not with sound, but with a feeling, the sensation of being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. It spreads across the lagoon like a pressure drop before a storm. The Marines sense it too. They tighten their grips on their rifles. Their steps become a little quicker, their shoulders rising slightly out of reflex. The water around them seems to hush, as if the ocean itself is bracing for what comes next. Ahead, the sand glows brighter through the drifting smoke. The palms sway slowly, indifferent. Somewhere beneath them, the first machine gun bolts are sliding into place. The lagoon walk is not yet over, but the moment of quiet is. The first lines of fire. The silence breaks not with a single shot, but with a shift in the island's posture, as though BTO finally decides it has waited long enough. A thin, sharp crack rings out from somewhere behind the palms. Then another. They are spaced, almost exploratory, probing the distance. The Marines pause instinctively, their heads lifting in unison. A few flinch as the rounds strike the water near them, sending up small, needle-fine splashes. The lagoon, moments ago a shimmering blue expanse, now feels tight, shallow, exposed. The first machine guns open up. They emerge from the island's shadows in controlled, precise bursts. Tracers flick through the haze like sparks dragged through fog. The sound echoes across the lagoon, a hard, mechanical stutter that cuts through the steady rhythm of waves. Some Marines duck instinctively, though there is almost nowhere to hide. The water has no shelter. The reef offers no cover. Each man stands silhouetted in the open, a moving figure against a flat horizon. You drift above the scene as the first bullets lash through the shallows. Water erupts in narrow, violent plumes around the advancing line. The Marines tighten their formations without needing to be told. Shoulders hunch, heads dip, arms strain to keep rifles high and dry, even as every instinct demands they move faster. But moving faster is not always possible. Packs drag, boots catch. The coral beneath their feet shifts abruptly from firm to uneven. Some Marines stumble as bullets crack past, slipping and flailing for balance. Others press on with short, forceful strides that push them deeper into the shallows, eyes fixed forward despite the pressure building behind each step. The island is fully awake now. More machine guns join the chorus, each one firing from a slightly different angle. Their patterns overlap, creating a lattice of force meant to break any approach long before it reaches the beach. Behind the firing ports, Japanese defenders operate in narrow, air-thick rooms, their hands moving with practiced clarity. Months of preparation converge into this single moment. Sight, aim, fire, adjust, fire. Yet the Marines continue forward. Not in a rush, not in a desperate sprint, but in a steady, deliberate advance that reflects the weight of training pressed into each of them. They move like men shouldering through a storm, focusing not on every raindrop, but on the way the horizon inches nearer. The lagoon grows slightly shallower still, water reaching their waists instead of their chests. Every inch gained feels fragile. Behind them, more landing craft grind against the reef. Some coxswains try to reverse, attempting to reposition for a better lane, but the water is too shallow and the coral too unforgiving. Boats twist sideways under the strain. Marines inside brace themselves as machine gun fire starts stitching across the metal hulls, pinging against armored plating with sharp, ringing impacts. The officers in the water raise their arms, waving their men forward, urging them to close the distance quickly but without panic. Their gestures cut through the spray, clear and steady. The shore is close now, close enough to see the darker shapes of palm trunks clearly, close enough that individual sandbags come into focus. But it is also close enough that BTO's defenses can reach them with precision. Mortar rounds begin to fall. The first one lands in the shallows ahead of the lead elements, throwing up a tall, white column of water and foam. The blast arrives a heartbeat later, a muffled, underwater thud that pushes a small wave outward. Marines duck, their helmets dipping beneath the surface, only to rise again with the same determined pace. More rounds follow, spaced deliberately, searching the lagoon for the patterns of movement below. Each impact sends rippling shock waves through the water, bending the reflections of men who continue to wade forward, step by step. The horizon remains unchanged, yet every few seconds the distance shrinks by a few feet. Some Marines begin murmuring to each other. Not full sentences, just clipped warnings. Deeper here, watch your footing, keep moving. Their voices are swallowed by the wind, but the intention passes easily among them. This is the long walk, the part of the approach that feels endless, the part where the mind narrows its focus to the next few steps and nothing more. You drift closer as the first wave finally approaches water shallow enough that some men begin to run, splashing forward with a burst of momentum. A few try to crouch lower as bullets rake the surface, but crouching only slows them. Running only heightens exposure. Every movement is a compromise. The beach is near. You can see the dark tangle of obstacles buried just beneath the sand. You can see the narrow gaps between log barriers. You can see the faint outline of a trench cut into the shore. The lagoon has taken them as far as it can. The next moments will be dictated not by water, but by sand and fire. The shattered shoreline. The moment the first Marines reach the shallows where water no longer clamps at their ribs, the character of the battle changes. The lagoon has been slow and punishing, but predictable in its way. The resistance of water, the weight of gear, the treachery of unseen coral. Now, as boots drag free of the surf and sink into wet sand, the men step into an environment shaped entirely by intention. The beach is not a smooth incline. It is a scarred, uneven threshold built to disrupt and disorient. Barbed wire lies half submerged beneath the sand, its twisted coils waiting to catch ankles. Angled stakes jut outward from the surf line like broken ribs. Dark, jagged shapes, the remains of palm logs and steel rails, create a maze that forces the Marines into narrow, predictable paths. Every obstacle is placed with precision, each one part of a geometry designed to channel movement into the lines of fire now sweeping across the shoreline. The machine guns intensify as the first wave pushes forward. Their rhythm becomes sharper, closer. Bullets strike the sand with dry, biting impacts that throw up small bursts of dust. Others hit the water behind the men, tracing thin white lines across the lagoon's surface. The island's defensive voice, cold, mechanical, relentless, rises into something like a single, continuous chord. You drift along the shoreline, watching the Marines press into this space with a mixture of determination and exhaustion. Boots sink into soft sand, pulling at legs already burning from the long wade. Packs sway heavily, dragging shifts in balance. Men cluster instinctively behind any piece of cover they can find, a half-buried log, a low ridge of sand, the angled frame of a landing obstacle. But these fragments offer only moments of reprieve. For many, the first few steps on solid ground feel surreal. The noise sharpens without the cushioning effect of water. The air seems heavier, more immediate. The island is no longer a distant silhouette, but a dense tangle of fortifications only meters away. The smell of burned vegetation mixes with the salty tang of the lagoon. Heat radiates from the sand in shimmering waves. Officers shout brief commands: low, steady, controlled. Move up. Keep low. Find cover. The words are practical, but their tone carries a recognition that the shoreline is a threshold of extreme vulnerability. Behind them, more Marines emerge from the water, forming uneven clusters along the beach, each group trying to orient themselves amid the chaos. For a moment, there's a sense of compression, as though the entire first wave has been squeezed into a narrow band of sand with no room to maneuver. The bunkers directly ahead begin firing in overlapping arcs, forcing the Marines into crouched positions. Sand kicks up around them in flashes. Flying grit stings skin and eyes. The bunkers themselves are difficult to see at first. Their low, squat shapes blend into the island's contour. Only the dark, horizontal slits reveal their presence, the cold, watchful eyes of a fortress built to deny entry. Each firing port is a needle, and the shoreline becomes the cloth on which those needles work. Mortars continue striking behind the first wave, their explosions thudding into the lagoon where more Marines are still wading, trying to close the distance. The air fills with the rising scent of cordite. The smoke thickens near the treeline, drifting in slow layers that blur the edges of the island. Despite the pressure, some small pockets of momentum take shape. A few Marines dash forward in short bursts, sliding into depressions carved by earlier bombardments. Others work to cut through the low coils of wire with handheld cutters, their movements quick and sharp. Every bit of progress feels fragile, earned through grit rather than advantage. You watch as one group edges toward a shallow dip in the sand, the closest thing to a natural path toward the island's inner defenses. Their heads stay low, shoulders tight. The noise crashes over them like surf. Yet they move with a steady, practiced rhythm. Pause, assess, surge. The shoreline is a crucible. It forces the men into narrow channels of action and thought. There is no room for anything but the next few feet of ground. Behind them, the lagoon continues to empty more Marines into this tightening space. Ahead of them, BTO waits, its silence broken only by the chatter of guns and the steady, unwavering resolve of the men defending it. The battle has reached its first true collision. Under the shadow of the bunkers. The low thrum of machine gun fire becomes a constant presence, a vibration moving through the sand and the air as the Marines press deeper onto the beach. The shoreline is narrow, narrower than anyone expected, and the men find themselves pinned between the ocean behind them and the dense wall of fortifications ahead. There is no room to spread out. Every movement must be angled, every decision measured against the unforgiving geometry of BTO's defenses. You drift along the lip of the sand, tracing the lines where Marines take cover in shallow depressions left by the naval bombardment. Some of these craters offer brief shelter, but many are too exposed, their edges steep enough to trap men inside but not deep enough to protect them from the sweeping arcs of fire. The instinct is to crouch low and hold, but holding is as dangerous as moving. The bunkers, at first only vague shapes through the haze, now stand in sharp relief. They are squat, angular structures of reinforced concrete, their surfaces scorched and cracked but structurally intact. Months of engineering have shaped them into fortified islands within the island. Their firing slits are narrow, precise, and aligned with the choke points on the beach. Inside, Japanese machine gunners work steadily, their movements economical, their positions protected by thick walls and overlapping layers of sandbags. Marine officers know these fortifications must be breached, but the initial wave is still too scattered and too exposed to mount a coordinated assault. Instead, men begin inching forward on instinct, hugging the sand, using whatever microterrain the bombardment has left. A few crawl toward the angled remains of a log barrier, using it as a guide toward the nearest patch of relative safety. Others press themselves behind low dunes, waiting for a moment when the fire slackens enough to allow a few steps of progress. Behind the first wave, reinforcements continue to pour onto the beach, arriving in clusters that immediately disperse into the same patches of cover. The shoreline becomes a living tapestry of movement, tiny shifts, calculated crawls, brief dashes that last only seconds but feel like fragments of survival stitched together in real time. The heat rises as the sun climbs higher, pressing down with an oppressive weight. Sweat mixes with sand, turning gear straps into abrasive lines across shoulders and necks. Breathing grows tight. Every inhale draws in a mixture of salt, dust, and cordite. The noise is constant but uneven. Bursts of automatic fire, the whine of ricochets, the thud of mortars landing farther back in the lagoon. At the center of the beach, a group of Marines gathers behind the partial shelter of a bomb crater. Their faces are streaked with grit. They speak in brief, clipped exchanges, mapping the position of the nearest bunker, identifying the angles of its fire. One of them traces a rough outline in the sand, indicating a narrow blind spot along the bunker's flank where the defenders cannot see clearly. The path to reach that flank is short, but it is fully exposed. To move along, it means rising from cover and crossing 20 feet of sand under direct observation. It is the kind of distance that feels manageable on paper, but expands into something vast under fire. Still, the men prepare. A few adjust their gear, checking grenades, ensuring their rifles are clear of sand. Others look toward the treeline, where secondary bunkers wait, silent for now but ready to activate if the Marines breach the first layer. Every action is precise, driven by the understanding that this beach is not a place to linger. To stay here too long is to invite the island's full concentration of fire. You drift closer, sensing the moment when hesitation gives way to decision. One Marine leans forward, scanning the gap ahead. Another nods. The air between them and the bunker feels tense, charged, as if the island itself is aware of their intent. The machine gun inside the firing slit continues its rhythm, sweeping the shoreline with mechanical patience. A burst of smoke from a distant explosion drifts across the gap, thin, fleeting, but enough to soften the line of sight for a second or two. The Marines seize the moment. They surge out of the crater in a low, quick sprint, legs pumping through the soft sand, gear rattling against their bodies. The gap narrows with each step. The world around them compresses into fragments of motion. The shadow of the bunker, the glint of metal inside the firing slit, the sudden kick of sand as bullets chase their heels. They reach the flank, sliding into the narrow, precious space where the bunker's angle of fire cannot reach. Breath heaves in their throats. Hearts hammer. But they have made it. Behind them, the beach remains a place of pinned-down vulnerability. Ahead of them is the path deeper into BTO, and the battle for the bunkers will begin in earnest. Inside the first breach. The narrow strip along the bunker's flank is barely a path at all, more a compressed wedge of sand pressed between concrete and coastline. It smells of heat, old smoke, and the faint trace of oil seeping from the bunker's vents. The air is close here, heavier than on the open beach, as though the structure itself is exhaling warmth built over months of tropical sun. The Marines who reached this position press their backs flat against the concrete. Their breaths come in short, controlled bursts. Above them, on the bunker's roof, sand shifts and trickles downward with each distant explosion. Concrete dust floats in the air like a pale mist. The men are so close to the structure that the firing slit is now only a dark rectangle over their shoulders, its line of fire extending outward across the beach and lagoon, missing them only by the geometry of its construction. You drift above them, tracing the small details, the way their fingers tighten around rifle stocks, the quick glances exchanged without words, the quiet resolve settling into their posture. This is the first real opportunity to break the island's defensive shell, and it has to be seized quickly. Remaining here too long risks drawing attention from secondary bunkers or from the defenders inside this one, who may already sense movement along their blind side. One Marine edges forward, flattening himself along the wall. He moves in short bursts, a few feet at a time, staying close enough that his shoulder brushes against the rough concrete. He reaches a reinforced corner where sand has piled at the base, forming a small mound that partially obscures the lower edge of the structure. The bunker's side ventilation slits are visible here, narrow openings that release hot, stale air from inside. The sound of the machine gun firing from the front echoes through the walls, a muted but continuous vibration that pulses through the concrete. Another Marine follows, carrying a satchel with demolition charges. He moves carefully, aware that any noise above a whisper could travel into the bunker. The satchel bumps against his hip, its weight both a burden and the key to opening this first breach. Behind him, a third Marine provides cover, his rifle angled toward the treeline where shapes flicker occasionally between the palms, defenders repositioning, watching, calculating. The first Marine reaches the corner and waits, pressing himself low. He listens. The machine gun inside continues its steady rhythm, but beneath that sound he picks up faint voices, clipped, muffled Japanese commands passed in hurried cadence. The defenders know the assault has begun. They know the shoreline is breached. What they don't yet know is how close the Marines have come to their flank. A tension hangs in the air, a thin line drawn between movement and detection. The Marines wait for a rhythm in the gunfire, a pause long enough to mask the metallic click of arming a charge. The bunker's firing bursts create their own pattern, short, sharp lines of fire followed by a moment of readjustment, then another burst. It's during that brief, subtle lull that the Marines prepare. The second Marine kneels, opening the satchel with careful, practiced motions. Inside are two charges, compact, powerful, designed for exactly this kind of fortification. He hands one forward, then checks a lighter charge for the ventilation slit, a secondary option if they cannot reach the main access point. The plan must be adaptable. BTO's defenses are exacting. So must be the response. The heat along the bunker's side grows more noticeable. Air vents exhale warm drafts that smell of gunpowder and sweat. The Marines exchange one last glance, the kind that acknowledges the risk without romanticizing it. There is nothing heroic in this moment, only necessity. You drift closer, sensing the shift as they move into position. The charge is primed during the brief pause between firing bursts. The metallic snap of the mechanism is almost lost beneath the sound of the next recoil cycle. The Marines lean forward, placing the charge at the base of the bunker's side, wedging it into the narrow space where sand meets concrete. The placement is quick, precise. They pull back toward the corner, pressing flat against the bunker's flank. Seconds stretch. The bunker continues firing, unaware. Then the charge detonates. The explosion is sharp and contained, a dense roar that punches inward rather than outward. Sand leaps into the air in a sudden plume. Concrete cracks. The firing from the bunker's front sputters, stutters, then halts entirely. Smoke billows from the newly opened seam, curling upward in slow, dark tendrils. Inside the bunker, defenders shout, their voices rising in confusion. The Marines at the flank take their chance, moving quickly toward the breach. There is no victory here yet, only an opening. The battle for the heart of BTO has begun. Clearing the first strong point. Smoke coils from the fractured seam in the bunker's wall, drifting upward in slow, twisting ribbons. The air is thick with the smell of ruptured concrete, burnt powder, and the faint metallic tang of disturbed earth. For a brief moment, the world around the bunker seems to hold its breath. The machine gun has gone silent, an absence so stark it feels louder than the firing that came before. The Marines press close to the structure, waiting for the smoke to thin just enough to reveal the opening created by the charge. Their bodies are tense, angled forward, prepared for the moment when stillness turns back into motion. Inside the bunker, muffled voices rise in quick, frantic bursts, echoing off the reinforced walls. The defenders are disoriented, caught between the vulnerability of the breach and the instinct to re-establish firing lines. You drift above the seam, observing how the explosion has warped the bunker's geometry. The concrete has not collapsed. It has split, creating a jagged aperture along the base. Chunks of rebar protrude like exposed ribs. Sand pours through the opening, creating a thin cascade that collects in a shallow mound just inside the breach. The interior beyond is dark and narrow, lit only by faint ambient light filtering through smoke. The Marines move. Two approach the opening first, crouching low, rifles angled and ready. One of them pauses to swipe a hand through the drifting haze, clearing a small gap of visibility. A faint warmth radiates from inside, the lingering heat of a confined space packed with machinery and men. The air that escapes smells sharp and stale, a mixture of sweat, cordite, and the thick humidity of a sealed fortification. The lead Marine leans closer, glimpsing the tight interior. A narrow chamber lined with sandbags and ammunition crates, its low ceiling reinforced with wooden beams darkened by soot. Shadows move within it, confused, scrambling shapes adjusting to the breach that has cut their shelter open. A discarded tool rolls across the floor as someone inside shifts position. With a silent gesture, the Marines at the breach coordinate their entry. Everything is based on simple, efficient communication. A tap on the shoulder, a nod, the slightest motion of a hand. There's no space here for shouted instructions or dramatic action. The bunker's interior compresses every movement into something deliberate and quiet. The first Marine moves through the opening, sliding across the sand mound and into the chamber. He keeps low, hugging the wall. The others follow, filling the narrow space with a blend of calm purpose and heightened awareness. Their boots scuff softly against the concrete floor. A small lantern inside flickers, casting distorted shadows against the far wall. The defenders inside the bunker attempt to reposition, trying to pull back toward a secondary room deeper inside. Their movements echo faintly, hurried, scraping sounds against stone. They are trapped by the very architecture meant to protect them. The Marines close the distance quickly, occupying the chamber and securing its corners with practiced fluidity. You drift through the bunker's cramped interior, noting the details that mark this place as both command post and last refuge. Maps lie pinned against a wooden board, corners curled from humidity. A metal cup lies overturned near the firing slit. The machine gun, now silent, rests atop a sandbagged position angled sharply toward the beach, its barrel still hot, its tripod half buried in dust. Outside, the battle continues to churn along the shoreline. Mortars thud in distant arcs, and machine guns from secondary bunkers rake the sand in measured sweeps. The beach remains a narrow band of vulnerability where Marines advance in small, careful surges. But here, within this first bunker, a rare pocket of breathing space forms, a small but significant foothold against BTO's outer defenses. The Marines secure the chamber, ensuring no defenders remain hidden in alcoves. One kneels beside the machine gun position, checking its field of fire. Another scans the rear passage that leads deeper into the bunker's interior network. The structure extends inward, a hive of interconnected rooms and firing corridors designed to delay and disorient anyone who breaches the exterior. The breach team exchanges a few brief murmurs. None speak about what it took to reach this place. None reflect on the bodies pinned along the shoreline or the men still struggling through the lagoon. There is no time for that. The momentum must continue. They take position at the rear passage, preparing to move deeper. Outside, the smoke clears just enough to reveal the next bunker in the chain, a low, angular shadow half buried beneath the palms, its firing slit glowing faintly with heat from recent bursts. Its guns have already begun searching for new angles on the Marines gathering near the first breach. The assault has opened one door. But BTO is a maze, and they are only at its threshold. The maze beneath the palms. The further the Marines push inland, the more the character of BTO begins to shift. The shoreline's harsh exposure gives way to a claustrophobic labyrinth, low sand ridges, shattered palms, and a dense web of trenches winding like arteries beneath the surface. The island is small, but it feels vast within these twisting paths, each one carved with purpose, each one linking bunkers that are far more interconnected than they appeared from the water. You drift above the newly captured strongpoint, watching as the Marines regroup in the narrow strip of shade cast by the bunker's low roof. The air here is heavy and humid, thick with dust and drifting smoke. From the interior passageway, faint echoes continue to filter outward, the shifting of gear deeper inside the structure, the distant thrum of voices that suggest the defenders are repositioning. The men know they cannot linger. Any delay risks drawing enfilade fire from the neighboring bunker or a counterattack through one of the trenches that feed into this defensive line. The first strong point may be secure, but the positions surrounding it are not. One Marine checks his canteen, takes the smallest sip, then replaces it with careful precision. Another adjusts his bandolier, sand sticking to every surface. Gear soaked from the lagoon has begun to dry unevenly beneath the rising heat. Sweat streaks through dust on their faces, turning everything into a thin paste that clings to skin. Ahead of them, the trench line begins. From above, it resembles a jagged scar running through the island, a narrow, winding channel barely shoulder width in some places. The walls are reinforced with stacked sandbags and palm logs. Overhead, a few sections are covered with sheets of corrugated metal or woven palm fronds, creating dim tunnels that hum with trapped heat. These overhead covers cast narrow beams of light downward, illuminating the trench in broken, shifting patterns. It is through this trench that the Japanese defenders can move unseen, allowing them to appear unexpectedly, fire from unexpected angles, and retreat just as quickly. The Marines must enter it if they are to push deeper inland. But stepping into the trench is more than a tactical choice. It is an acceptance of close, suffocating combat where visibility shrinks to a few feet at a time and the world narrows into walls of sand and shadow. You drift lower as the Marines prepare to descend. An officer scans the trench with a mirror, angling the small piece of metal around the corner to glimpse what waits ahead. The reflection reveals only a short stretch of empty passage, but the silence within it is not comforting. In places like this, quiet is often an intentional design, a way of hiding motion within the maze. The Marines stack up, forming a short column. The point man adjusts his grip on his rifle, checking the chamber, then glances once toward the palms that sway softly above the trench entrance. The contrast is striking. Overhead, the island appears peaceful, almost serene. Below, the earth is split open into a network engineered for ambush and attrition. They step down. The temperature rises immediately. The trench walls press in, absorbing and radiating heat. Sand shifts underfoot. The air feels thicker, carrying the faint smells of oil, dried vegetation, and something metallic that lingers in confined spaces. The overhead covers trap moisture, creating pockets where condensation drips intermittently. For a few seconds, the Marines move cautiously through the first stretch, scanning every indentation in the wall, every shadowed corner. The island seems to listen to their footsteps. Farther along, a clatter echoes, the unmistakable sound of movement. Someone dropping into position. Someone pulling back a bolt. The Marines freeze. The trench is too narrow for large maneuvers, too close for anything but immediate reaction. The officer signals a halt, holding up a closed fist. Sand sifts from the overhead covering as the men steady their breathing. The echo comes again, closer now, but still indistinct. A sudden burst of gunfire rips through the trench from around the bend. The sound is deafening in the confined space, a sharp, concussive blast that ricochets between the walls. Sand sprays inward. The Marines press low, adjusting their angles instinctively. The point man edges forward just enough to peek around the corner. Another burst snaps past the edge of the wall, forcing him back. The maze beneath the palms has revealed its first defender, a position dug in with precision, using the trench's tight geometry to its full advantage. The Marines exchange quick gestures, preparing to clear the bend. They know what lies ahead, a series of short, brutal encounters fought at distances where every second matters and every movement is magnified by the closeness of the earth around them. You drift upward, following the trench as it coils through the island. It leads toward more bunkers, deeper fortifications, and the heart of BTO's defenses. The island is tightening its grip, and the Marines, inside this narrow artery of sand, are stepping directly into it. Close quarters in the sand. The first defender's position is hidden just around the bend, a shallow recess carved into the inside wall of the trench, reinforced with logs and angled to cover the approach with lethal efficiency. From your vantage above the twisting path, the geometry becomes clear. This is not a random bend, but a deliberate turn designed to funnel attackers into a narrow killing zone where the defender can fire, reload, and shift position without exposing more than a sliver of his silhouette. The Marines below do not have the luxury of that full view. All they have is the sound, the sharp crack of each shot, the echo bouncing between sand-packed walls, the shifting rustle of someone adjusting their stance inside the recess. The trench's tightness turns every noise into something swollen, magnified, harder to locate with precision. The officer signals the men to hold position while he traces a short plan in the sand with a gloved fingertip. 2 Marines will angle left, hugging the inner wall. Another will position himself on the right, ready to suppress. A fourth will prepare a grenade, not thrown blindly, but carefully bounced around the bend to avoid premature detonation against the uneven earth. The grenade man nods once, steadying his breath. He knows the risks, The trench's tight angles could easily deflect the device, and the overhead coverings could trap fragments. But the alternative, charging a defended recess, is worse. He moves forward into a low crouch. The walls close in around him, and the heat rises with each step. Sand shifts beneath his boots. A faint trickle of grit falls from above as another round slams into the wall just inches from the bend. He cups the grenade, pulls the pin with a practiced twist, and angles his arm low. You watch from above as he releases it with a soft underhand roll, letting it skip once along the packed sand floor before disappearing into the shadowed recess. The explosion is loud in the confined space, a dense, concussive burst that throws dust outward in a thick plume. Sandbags rupture. Pieces of palm logs split. Smoke fills the corridor, drifting upward through cracks in the overhead coverings. The defenders inside the recess shout in alarm, voices sharp, urgent. The Marines surge forward. They round the bend with low, forceful movements, rifles ready, posture compact to avoid catching gear on the tight walls. The recess is a small cavity, barely large enough for 2 men, now choked in dust. A machine gun lies overturned on the sand, its tripod bent. The defenders inside are disoriented, scrambling to recover weapons or shift deeper into the shadowed rear of the alcove. In these distances, there is no room for hesitation. The Marines clear the recess quickly, securing the immediate space and ensuring no hidden passage leads deeper. The fight is brief, contained, brutal in its efficiency. Once the recess is secure, the team regroups at the bend. Their breaths are heavy, but their movements remain calm, the steady discipline of men who have trained for environments exactly like this. One Marine wipes sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Another adjusts the sling of his rifle, shaking loose the sand that has collected around the barrel. Ahead, the trench stretches deeper into the island. And it changes. The sections beyond the bend become taller, with occasional breaks in the overhead covering that allow beams of sunlight to pierce through. Hot light falls in narrow lines, illuminating drifting dust and cutting bright diagonal shapes across the walls. In these patches, the Marines can see farther, 10, maybe 15 feet, before the trench curves sharply again. This pattern repeats, short stretches of visibility punctuated by sudden bends, each one a potential ambush point. The Marines advance carefully, staying low and watching for telltale signs, a disturbed patch of sand, a shifting shadow, the faint glint of metal behind an angled log. A sudden whistle echoes through the passage, followed by the distant thud of a mortar landing somewhere near the beach behind them. Another follows, and then another. The defenders are adjusting their fire, attempting to box in the Marines who have entered the trench network. The officers exchange a few urgent gestures. They must move. Staying still in the trench invites a rain of explosives that could collapse the overhead coverings. A collapsed section could trap an entire squad. They press deeper into the maze. You drift overhead, watching the trench split into 2 branches ahead, one curving sharply toward a cluster of palm-shaded bunkers, the other dipping slightly downward into a semi-covered communication trench that leads toward the island's central ridge. Neither path is safe. Both must eventually be cleared. From this vantage, BTO resembles not a simple strip of land but a densely interconnected fortress, its defenses flowing through the earth like roots, binding each part of the island to every other. The Marines have pierced its edge, a crucial breach, but now the fight narrows again into close corridors, blind corners, and the steady pressure of defenders who know every twist by memory. The maze continues to tighten, and the Marines, one careful step at a time, move deeper into the island's core. The burning palms. As the Marines press deeper inland, the island begins to change again. The cramped, suffocating trenches gradually widen into a chaotic expanse of shattered vegetation and scorched earth. What was once a dense grove of palms has been transformed into a landscape of charred trunks, broken stumps, and smoldering brush. The bombardment has torn the canopy apart, leaving the air exposed to the full glare of the sun, and the heat descends in waves that shimmer just above the ground. You rise above this transformed grove, watching how the shadows of palm trunks stretch thin across the sand. Many of the trees burn still, slow, persistent fires licking upward along bark blackened to brittle charcoal. Smoke drifts in layered sheets, curling toward the sky in uninterrupted spirals. The scent here is a strange mixture: burnt wood, singed fronds, and the deeper mineral odor of scorched earth. Marines emerge from the trench network into this broken clearing with relief and unease entwined. The openness provides new angles of movement, more space to maneuver, and a clear view of the bunkers scattered across the grove. But openness also means exposure, and the defenders know it. The Japanese positions in this part of the island are arranged like a tightening fist: low fortifications made from concrete, palm logs, and sandbags, each one camouflaged beneath layers of debris. Some are small firing pits with downward slanting embrasures. Others are larger blockhouses angled inward to create overlapping fields of fire. From the outside, they're difficult to distinguish among the ruins. Only the brief flash of muzzle fire reveals their presence. As the Marines step into the grove, the first shots crack through the haze. The bullets strike the sand with sharp, dry impacts. Fragments of wood burst from the sides of charred trunks. The air vibrates with the sudden, stuttering rhythm of automatic fire. The Marines drop low, scattering behind stumps and debris while officers call out short commands. Not shouted, but projected in steady, measured tones that cut through the chaos without inviting unnecessary attention. The grove becomes a battlefield of fragments. Cover is partial. Visibility shifts constantly as smoke drifts in unpredictable gusts. The ground is uneven, pitted by shell craters that offer both refuge and hazard. Some craters hold standing water tinted with ash. Others are filled with splintered roots and tangled fronds. You drift between the trees, tracing the Marines' movements. They advance in short, coordinated pushes, two men moving forward while another provides covering fire from behind a broken palm trunk. The sound of their rifles weaves through the deeper thud of machine guns firing from hidden positions. Every few seconds, the defenders adjust their angles, trying to anticipate the advance. The heat intensifies. The sun bears down with a heavy glare, bouncing off the pale sand in blinding reflections. Sweat runs down the Marines' necks and soaks into their uniforms. Their gear, still damp from the lagoon, now dries unevenly, stiffening against their bodies. Breathing becomes a conscious effort, each inhale thick with smoke and heat. As the Marines reach the center of the grove, a new threat emerges. Mortar rounds begin to fall with increasing accuracy. The first one lands with a dull, bone-deep thud, sending a column of sand spraying outward in a slow arc. The shockwave rattles the nearby palms, shaking loose dead fronds that fall in brittle clusters. Another follows. Then two more, spaced just far enough apart to force the Marines into constant movement. The grove becomes a shifting dance: advance, drop, cover, rise. The Marines dash between stumps, dive into shallow depressions, and hug the bases of still-burning trees. Every movement is timed to the pauses between bursts of fire or the brief lull between mortar impacts. Yet amid this chaos, patterns begin to emerge. The Marines identify the primary firing positions: a large blockhouse partially buried beneath a mound of sand, its firing slit glowing faintly with each burst; a smaller pillbox concealed behind the angled remains of a collapsed palm grove; and a trench entrance hidden beneath a jumble of fronds but marked by the faint outline of packed earth around its rim. These positions anchor the defenders' control over the grove. Clearing them is the next objective. But reaching them means crossing stretches of sand where cover is scarce, and the defenders have the advantage of elevation and entrenchment. One marine signals toward a shallow crater halfway across the clearing, a potential waypoint. Another points to a pair of stumps that form a narrow corridor of partial cover. A team begins to coordinate the next push. The burning palms sway gently as the wind shifts, their flames crackling softly beneath the rhythmic violence of the battle. Smoke thickens, rising in slow waves that turn the sky above the grove into a muted, flickering haze. The island is burning, and with every step deeper into its shattered heart, the Marines begin to understand just how fiercely BTO intends to hold its ground. Into the blockhouse fire. The clearing narrows toward the center of the grove, funneling the Marines toward a cluster of blockhouses that form the backbone of this inland defensive line. These structures are heavier than the ones near the shoreline, thicker walls, deeper foundations, and firing ports angled with deliberate precision to cross their arcs over the open sand. They sit half-buried, their roofs blending into the debris of fallen palms, giving the impression of dormant stone creatures partially submerged in earth and smoke. You drift above as the Marines prepare to move. They crouch behind a scattering of burned-out trees, catching their breath in brief, careful intervals. The clearing in front of them is a patchwork of sand ridges, broken logs, and smoldering vegetation. Every piece of cover is temporary. Every line of movement feels exposed. A faint gesture passes between the Marines, a plan formed in a few simple motions. One team will lay down suppressive fire from the left flank, targeting the blockhouse's main firing slit. Another will move toward the shallow crater at the center of the clearing, using it as a midpoint from which to launch the final push toward the structure's rear entrance. The suppressive fire begins first. Rifles crack from behind the tree line, their shots aimed carefully at the narrow opening in the blockhouse's front. The firing slit flashes in response, returning bursts of automatic fire that send thin sprays of sand into the air. The exchange is rhythmic, controlled, a deliberate effort to pin the defenders inside, even if only for moments at a time. The assault team moves. They rise from the cover of the stumps and sprint low across the sand, gear clattering softly. Bullets trail them, kicking up spouts of sand that hiss through the air. The crater ahead offers only shallow shelter, but it is enough to drop into and catch a breath before the next move. The Marines slide into it, pressing their bodies against the heated sand as rounds whine overhead. From inside the crater, they get their first clear view of the blockhouse's side. A narrow slit marks a secondary firing port. Below it, the sand slopes downward toward a low, dark opening, likely an entry point used by the defenders to move in and out of the structure. But the approach to this entrance is a stretch of open ground, exposed to flanking fire from a smaller pillbox hidden within a tangle of fallen palms. The Marines study the angles quickly. One points toward the pillbox. Another readies a smoke grenade. The air in the crater tastes of ash and heat, heavy enough to sting the throat. The smoke grenade arcs upward, spinning through the air before landing between the crater and the pillbox. It erupts into a dense white cloud that billows outward, drifting low across the sand. The sudden curtain of smoke disrupts the defenders' visibility, obscuring their line of fire just long enough to attempt the crossing. The Marines surge out of the crater. They move through the smoke in tight formation, keeping close to one another but maintaining enough spacing to avoid clustering. Their silhouettes blur into the haze as they approach the blockhouse's side entrance. The world narrows to shapes and shadows, the faint outline of the doorway, the darkened geometry of the structure's wall, the drifting tendrils of smoke that cling to the sand. The first Marine reaches the entrance and stops short, flattening himself against the wall. Inside, the blockhouse is dim and echoing, lit only by small slits of daylight filtering through firing ports. The air is hotter within, trapped and thickened by the sealed design. The distant thrum of a nearby machine gun vibrates through the walls, carrying the unmistakable rhythm of defenders still fighting on the opposite side. The Marines stack up along the wall outside the entrance, their bodies pressed into the narrow strip of shade cast by the blockhouse's roof. A faint breeze stirs the smoke around them, momentarily revealing the open sand behind, a reminder of how narrow their window of approach has been. The lead Marine pulls a fragmentation grenade from his pouch. He thumbs the pin loose but holds the spoon firmly. The others lean in slightly, eyes fixed on the dark interior. You drift closer, watching the tension gather as a kind of stillness, a breath held in the midst of chaos. The grenade rolls into the entrance with a soft, hollow clatter. The explosion inside is deep and contained, a muffled thunder that shakes dust from the seams of the blockhouse. For a heartbeat, the firing from the front slit falters, then stops entirely. The Marines move immediately. They enter the blockhouse in a tight, coordinated wave, rifles raised and angled. The interior is low-ceilinged, with sandbags stacked to form firing alcoves. The light is poor, the visibility narrow. Shadows shift near the far wall as defenders attempt to reposition. The Marines respond with swift, controlled precision. Within moments, the blockhouse is secured. But the grove is far from quiet. Outside, gunfire from other bunkers intensifies, responding to the breach. Voices call out from the tree-line. A new mortar round falls closer than before, sending a shockwave rolling through the clearing. The blockhouse is only one piece of the larger structure, one link in a chain designed to resist collapse even under immense pressure. The Marines take a brief breath inside the captured position, adjusting ammunition, wiping grit from their eyes. The burning palms crackle in the wind. The next strong point waits. The push toward the airfield. Beyond the grove of burning palms, the terrain shifts yet again, flattening, widening, opening into a harsh, sun-scorched expanse that stretches toward the center of BTO. This is the island's airstrip, a cracked ribbon of compacted coral and sand that once promised movement and control but now lies exposed like a white-hot scar. From above, you see how the runway bisects the island, a barren corridor where there is nowhere to hide and nowhere to pause. The Marines emerge from the grove cautiously, their silhouettes wavering in the heat shimmer. The smoke behind them curls upward, leaving drifting shadows across the ground. The airfield ahead glows pale and unforgiving, the kind of open space that invites danger. The defenders know this too. Their bunkers line the far edge, low and half-buried beneath ridges of earth, each one angled to sweep the runway with long, unbroken arcs of fire. You hover above the Marines as they gather at the edge of the grove, crouching behind low mounds of churned sand. They don't speak much. The closeness of the trenches and the density of the grove had given them cover, however fragile. Here, the world stretches outward in a bleached horizon where every movement will be visible from 100 meters away. The first shots that reach them are long, searching bursts, tracers snapping across the runway from distant blockhouses. These rounds strike the ground in bright flashes, sending coral dust into the air. The Marines flatten themselves against the sand, feeling the heat radiate against their gear. Ahead, faint shapes shift behind firing ports, adjusting their lines of attack as the newcomers reposition. The officers scan the airfield swiftly. It is littered with debris, fragments of palm trunks, pieces of broken aircraft parts, scraps of metal scattered by the bombardment. Some offer minimal cover. Others cast shadows that hint at hidden depressions. The men pick out a handful of potential routes across the runway. A shallow crater near the center, a long, broken trench line that cuts across the surface, and a narrow ridge of compacted coral that might block line of sight for a few seconds. None of these are ideal. All of them are necessary. A fire team shifts forward first, crawling along the ground to reach a low berm that borders the grove. Bullets chase them, kicking up dust in quick stabs. When they reach the berm, they hunker down, breathing heavily. The next team prepares to move. The pattern repeats: suppressive fire, dash, dive, breathe, wait. The sun presses down on everything, so bright that the runway seems to shimmer like a mirage. Heat radiates from it in waves, distorting distance and shape. Every step feels slower in this glare. Every decision feels heavier. A mortar round lands near the center of the airfield, sending a plume of white coral dust into the sky. Another follows, closer to the grove. The island feels alive again, shifting its weight, adjusting its defenses, tightening its grip on anyone who dares to cross the open ground. From your vantage, the geometry becomes clearer. The nearest bunkers along the airfield's far edge are connected by trenches that run just behind the horizon of the runway. Any push must account for those unseen pathways, for defenders who can reposition quickly and appear at unexpected angles. The Marines know this too. They begin assembling behind a half-collapsed aircraft revetment, a curved wall of earth and sandbags meant to shield planes when this airfield was operational. Now, it becomes a temporary rally point. The revetment is shallow, but it provides a few precious feet of cover from direct fire. One Marine wipes sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of grit across his forehead. Another reloads carefully, checking each round as though feeling its weight. A third lifts his head just enough to glance toward the far bunkers, the shapes barely visible through the shimmer. The plan forms in quiet gestures: suppressive fire from the grove, smoke thrown low across the runway, and a staggered advance toward the central crater. The airfield is the spine of BTO. If the Marines can take it, they can split the defenders, reach the command bunkers beyond, and begin turning the battle in their favor. But crossing it means stepping into full exposure, into heat, dust, and the searching eyes of every hidden firing port along the ridge. A breeze stirs, lifting ash from the grove behind them. The Marines prepare to move. The runway waits. Crossing the white heat. The first smoke grenades sail low across the runway, spinning in uneven arcs before landing on the sun-bleached coral. They burst into thick white plumes that billow outward, floating just above the ground in slow, heavy waves. The smoke doesn't rise high. It clings to the surface, hugging the contours of the airfield, creating shallow pockets of concealment rather than tall walls. But even this is enough to fracture the defenders' lines of sight. The Marines surge forward in small, disciplined bounds. From above, you see the motion as a sequence of sharp, coordinated pulses, men sprinting low across the open ground, disappearing into patches of smoke, then reappearing briefly as gray silhouettes before dropping into depressions or behind scattered debris. The heat rising from the runway distorts their outlines, turning each movement into a wavering blur. The defenders react immediately. A machine gun opens from the far ridge, its tracers lancing through the haze in tight, searching arcs. Bullets snap across the runway, striking coral with bright, needle-fine sparks. The smoke diffuses some of the line of fire, but not all. The Marines press forward regardless, knowing every second in the open is a second borrowed against the island's aim. At the center of the runway, the shallow crater offers the first true piece of cover. Two Marines tumble into it, rolling onto the hot sand and breathing hard. The crater is only waist deep, but its lip shields them from immediate view. They scan the far ridge, watching for muzzle flashes beneath the shimmer. Around them, the runway becomes a shifting battlefield of movement and static fire. Suppressive rounds from the grove strike the far bunkers in steady bursts, keeping their gunners unsettled. Smoke rolls in uneven sheets, thinning in places where the wind pushes it aside. The Marines time their movements to those shifts, slipping through the visibility gaps before the defenders can readjust. Another team makes a run for the crater. They sprint with short, sharp strides, packs bouncing, rifles angled downward as they lean into the heat. A burst of fire sweeps across their path, cutting low. The air fills with the hiss of bullets slicing through smoke. They dive the final few feet, sliding into the crater in a cloud of dust. From inside, the world feels compressed, sunlight reduced to narrow streaks, noise amplified by the bowl-shaped walls, heat trapped and swirling. One Marine presses a hand to the crater's edge. It burns under his palm. He pulls it back quickly, shaking the sting from his fingers. The teams inside the crater exchange brief, wordless glances. They know the crossing is only half finished. Ahead lies the ridge of bunkers, low, angular silhouettes partially obscured by heat and smoke. Their firing slits glow with intermittent flashes. A few defenders shift positions, moving between trench openings that connect the bunkers like hidden corridors. Another mortar round falls behind the Marines, striking the grove where the suppressive team remains. The explosion sends a plume of debris skyward, shaking the palms that still burn along the edges of the clearing. The Marines in the crater crouch lower, aware that the defenders are adjusting their range. They cannot stay here long. A Marine raises a hand, signaling the next movement, a leapfrog push toward the broken trench line that runs along the far side of the airfield. If they can reach it, they can close the distance to the bunkers, approach from beneath their primary arcs of fire, and begin clearing them one by one. The suppressive fire increases. The Marines break from the crater. You watch as they burst over the lip, diving into another stretch of smoke. Their figures waver in the heat distortion, flickering like ghosts across the runway's blinding surface. One Marine darts behind a palm stump blackened by fire. Another slips into a shallow depression barely wide enough to fit him. A third pushes farther, heading toward a half-collapsed barrier made from stacked sand and scrap metal. The defenders shift again, their machine guns sweeping left and right, trying to track movement through the haze. Their rhythm falters for a second, just long enough for the Marines to cover the final stretch. The lead Marine reaches the broken trench. He drops into it with a muted thud, sliding down the slanted wall and landing in the narrow corridor below. The trench is partially collapsed, its sides crumbling and uneven, but it offers the one thing the runway does not: shadow. The others follow quickly, tumbling into the trench with dust rising around them. Here, the noise dims slightly, muffled by the banks of earth. The heat, though still oppressive, loses some of its direct glare. The men pause only long enough to catch a breath. Ahead, the trench bends toward the bunkers, a low, tight path that will take them directly beneath the defenders' strongest positions. The crossing is complete, but the airfield behind them continues to shimmer, bright and hostile, and the ridge ahead is waiting. Beneath the ridge guns. The broken trench the Marines now occupy snakes toward the ridge in a series of jagged angles, carved originally as a communication path for the island's defenders. Time, bombardment, and the weight of battle have fractured its walls, leaving sections half-collapsed and others intact enough to form narrow shadows beneath the burning sun. From above, the trench looks like a cracked vein running across the surface of BTO, subtle, winding, easily overlooked unless you know where to look. Inside it, the air changes. The heat becomes close and heavy, trapped by the earth. The sounds of the airfield, rifle bursts, shouting, the crack of bullets on coral, muffle into a distant static. What remains is the low hum of insects, the rustle of sand trickling from exposed roots, and the faint, constant vibration of machine gun fire from the ridge above. The Marines move cautiously, staying low, their bodies angled to keep weapons ready despite the tight confines. The trench is just wide enough for one man at a time. Passing gear from hand to hand becomes necessary in the narrower sections. Their boots grind against the coral-packed floor, each step sending dust drifting up in small, shimmering clouds. You drift above the trench, tracing the defenders' layout. Beyond the rise, 3 major bunkers anchor this part of the island. They are larger than the blockhouse captured earlier, reinforced structures with thick concrete roofs and firing slits shaped to rake both the runway and the airfield's edges. These bunkers are connected by shallow trenches, creating a web of pathways where defenders can relocate quickly and strike from new angles with little warning. The Marines inside the trench do not yet see these details, but they can feel them. The vibrations through the earth sharpen as they move closer to the ridge. A short burst of machine gun fire overhead sends dust raining through the gaps in the trench wall. One Marine raises a clenched fist, signaling a halt. The column freezes instantly, bodies pressed into the narrow space as the sound rolls across them like a passing storm front. The lead Marine inches toward a vertical spike of coral where the trench narrows. Just beyond it lies a junction where 2 pathways converge, one rising toward the ridge, the other running flat beneath a shallow canopy of woven palm fronds. He listens carefully. The quiet here is deceptive. The defenders move with deliberate steps, their sandals scraping lightly against the packed sand. Muffled voices drift downward, punctuated by the metallic clink of ammunition being loaded. The Marines exchange subtle gestures. They cannot allow the defenders to reinforce the bunkers while they are still in the trench. The element of concealment matters now more than ever. The lead Marine signals 2 others to shift left toward the lower path, while he and another prepare to climb toward the ridge in short bursts. The split maneuver will allow them to probe both directions, minimizing the risk of walking into a concentrated ambush. The lower path feels cooler beneath the woven fronds. Light filters through in broken shafts, creating mottled shadows on the walls. The Marines crouch as they move, their helmets brushing the low covering. The scent here is earthy and damp, trapped humidity mixed with a faint rot of fallen palms. The tunnel-like section curves gently, guiding them toward the rear of a bunker whose front faces the runway. From above, you can see its structure, a massive block of concrete half buried into the ridge's slope, its frontal firing slit glowing faintly from the heat of continuous fire. Its rear entrance is obscured by a tight bend and a low sand berm. The upper path tells a different story. The Marines climbing toward the ridge edge find the ground steeper, the trench walls more uneven. Roots protrude like grasping fingers. The incline compresses their movements, each step requiring them to brace briefly before pushing upward again. As they near the crest, the muffled boom of a nearby mortar tube becomes unmistakable. Someone is firing from just beyond the ridge, adjusting aim toward the airfield. The Marines crouch beneath a lip of earth, listening. They can hear the soft thump of the mortar baseplate, the faint rattle of shells being prepared, the curt exchange of commands spoken in quick Japanese syllables. The mortar team operates with practiced efficiency. Their rhythm is steady, almost calm. The Marines exchange a glance. To push forward without disrupting this team would be to invite a barrage onto the runway, and onto the Marines who are still crossing beneath the fading smoke. The decision forms instantly. They must neutralize the mortar position before moving on the bunkers. Below, in the lower trench, the Marines prepare their own advance. They can see the rear berm now, an uneven mound of sand that hides the bunker's back entrance. One Marine raises 2 fingers, then points forward. They will approach quietly, staying low, searching for a blind angle from which to gain the upper hand. Above and below, the Marines breathe slowly, centering themselves. Both groups wait for the same moment, listening to the same battlefield rhythm. The ridge guns continue their steady firing. But BTO's heart is beginning to beat faster. The moment to strike draws near. Breaking the ridge line. The Marines positioned on the upper trench path move first. They edge upward toward the crest, hugging the earth until their helmets nearly scrape the packed soil above them. The sounds of the mortar crew grow clearer with each foot gained, the scrape of a round drawn from its case, the gentle clink of fins brushing the tube rim, the low murmur of voices speaking with steady certainty. The Marines pause just below the ridge line. The lead Marine slowly raises his head just enough to see over the edge. From above, you observe the mortar team clearly. 3 defenders working in rhythm inside a shallow pit reinforced by sandbags. The tube is angled toward the runway, its base plate dug deep into the coral. A small stack of mortar shells rests in the shade of a broken palm trunk. 1 man aligns the tube, another loads, and a third watches for signals from the bunkers along the trench. The operation is disciplined, precise. Below the ridge, the Marines exchange a final glance. The lead Marine pulls a fragmentation grenade from his pouch, checks the fuse by touch, then rolls upward onto his elbows. His silhouette remains small, a mere ripple against the earth as he pulls the pin. The grenade arcs into the pit. The explosion is tight and violent, contained within the sandbagged hollow. Dust erupts into the air in a thick surge. The mortar tube jerks and falls sideways. The defenders' rhythm breaks instantly. The Marines crest the ridge. They move quickly, taking advantage of the sudden disruption. Their rifles rise in crisp, controlled motions. Within moments, the mortar position is secured, the weapon disabled, the pit cleared. For the first time since entering the runway, the air above the Marines feels briefly lighter. 1 threat has been removed. But the ridge is far from silent. A burst of automatic fire rips across the slope from a bunker farther down the line, cutting shallow grooves into the sand. Another Marine drops low, bracing behind a jutting root. The defenders have not yet realized they've lost their mortar team, but they know something has shifted. Below, the lower team has reached the berm behind the bunker. Hidden from the front by the structure's thick walls and angled firing slits, the Marines can approach the rear entrance without drawing immediate attention. The berm rises sharply, forming a natural screen. Smoke from the mortar pit drifts across the ridge, thinning and curling along the ground. The Marines prepare to breach. 1 takes position on the berm's edge, raising a hand in silent signal. Another kneels beside him, cradling a satchel charge. The air is stifling, a trapped pocket of heat and dust that clings to skin, clogging breath. Sand shifts beneath their boots as they inch closer to the bunker's dark rear doorway. Inside, defenders move. Faint footsteps, the scrape of gear, the low hum of voices relaying information through the trench network. Timing is everything. The upper team, still at the ridge line, opens a short burst of fire at the next bunker along the slope, drawing attention away from the rear approach. The defenders respond instantly, shifting fire toward the ridge. Their rounds chew into the soil just inches below the Marines' elbows. The lower team moves. They round the berm in a compact burst, keeping low. The satchel charge is planted at the entrance, wedged against a reinforcement log that braces the doorway frame. The Marine who placed it pulls back quickly, sand spraying beneath his boots as he retreats behind the berm. The explosion is deep, a rumbling concussion that echoes through the earth. A plume of dust and debris bursts outward. Silence trembles in its wake. The Marines push into the breach. You drift through the opening as they move into the dim interior. The bunker is larger than the ones near the beach, a reinforced command node with multiple firing alcoves, low ceilings, and a corridor that connects to the trench network beyond. Inside, visibility is narrow, shapes shifting in subdued light. Sand drifts in thick sheets through the newly opened breach. The Marines advance with careful precision. They secure each alcove, check each recess, sweep the connecting corridor. Their breathing is controlled, paced. Their movements are small but decisive. The defenders inside, disoriented by the blast, attempt to reposition but are overtaken before they can regroup. Within minutes, the bunker is secure, and with its fall, a key section of the ridge line fractures. From above, you see the effect ripple outward. The defenders in neighboring positions shift anxiously, their lines of communication disrupted. Smoke rises from 2 points now, the mortar pit and the breached bunker. The Marines on the ridge consolidate their position, adjusting along the slope as they prepare to press farther down the line. Below, the airfield lies behind them, shimmering in the heat. Ahead, the ridge line bends southward, where more bunkers sit buried beneath layers of sand and palm fiber. The battle has turned, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of deliberate, grinding steps that carve a path deeper into BTO's heart. But the island is still dense with resistance, and the strongest defenses lie just beyond the curve of the ridge. The last redoubts of BTO. The ridge slopes downward into the most fortified heart of the island, a dense network of interlocking bunkers, buried command posts, and firing positions designed to withstand direct bombardment and prolonged assault. From above, the terrain forms a hard, angular mosaic. Low concrete shapes half submerged in sand, narrow trenches that link them like connective tissue, and scattered pockets of broken palms that offer deceptive shadows. This final cluster of defenses is where the island's defenders have gathered their remaining strength. It is here that they have prepared to make their last, determined stand. You drift over the Marines as they assemble at the base of the ridge's far side, catching their breath in the narrow shade cast by a low fold of earth. The air feels different here, not cooler, but still, as if the wind itself hesitates to cross this final line. Smoke drifts outward from the bunkers ahead in thin, measured strands, evidence of ongoing fire and hurried repositioning within the defensive network. The Marines crouch low, listening. There is movement inside the nearest bunker, the scrape of boots, the shift of sandbags, the unmistakable thump of a heavy machine gun being repositioned. The defenders are alert, bracing for the approach. They know the ridge line has been breached. They know the Americans are closing in. Officers gather briefly, sketching the layout of the final defenses in the sand. This cluster forms a triangle of fire, a central command blockhouse, larger and deeper than any encountered so far, a flanking pillbox built into a mound of earth, nearly invisible except for the faint glint of its firing slit, a buried strongpoint whose entrance is concealed beneath a layer of palm fronds and netting, a structure capable of holding dozens of defenders. Each position covers the others. Advancing on any one of them exposes the Marines to fire from the remaining two. Yet the Marines must break through. Past these strongpoints lies the far end of the island, the final stretch of BTO's defensive network, and beyond that, the shoreline where the battle will ultimately conclude. The first move is subtle. A small team pushes forward into a shallow depression carved by earlier shellfire. The dip provides only partial cover, but it edges them closer to the central blockhouse's blind side, the angle where its primary firing slit cannot reach. You follow their silhouettes as they descend into the depression, moving carefully through cracked coral and scattered debris. Above them, the air vibrates with machine gun fire. The pillbox on the flank opens first, sweeping its arc across the ridge's approach. Tracers cut through the haze, stitching bright lines through drifting dust. The Marines in the depression press themselves into the earth, letting the rounds pass inches above their helmets. Almost simultaneously, the buried strongpoint joins the fight. From beneath its camouflaged roof, bursts of fire lash outward in controlled patterns. Its defenders have a wide field of view, allowing them to target any movement across the forward slope. The Marines cannot remain pinned for long. The officers behind them signal for smoke. 3 canisters arcing high, trailing faint streams before landing with muted thuds. Smoke begins to bloom across the forward slope, rolling outward in low, thick waves that soften the defenders' aim. But the defenders adjust quickly. A sudden explosion erupts from the trench line leading toward the pillbox, a mortar round fired from deeper within the network. Sand and coral spray upward in a column of white dust. The Marines hold low, bracing against the blast as fragments rattle across the ground. The battlefield grows louder. More bunkers join in, firing in steady, intersecting rhythms. The smoke drifts sideways as the wind shifts, revealing glimpses of moving shadows inside the firing slits. The defenders move with urgency, aware their perimeter is collapsing but determined to hold the last ground they have. The Marines regroup, adjusting their approach. 2 fire teams begin a coordinated advance, one toward the buried strongpoint, one toward the pillbox. Their movements are slow but deliberate, shaped by the terrain and by the knowledge that every step takes them closer to structures designed to survive the heaviest bombardment. You drift overhead, watching the shapes move through rising dust and smoke, silhouettes shifting in the muted light. The sound of battle compresses into a layered rhythm, the deep thud of rifles, the constant growl of machine guns, the crack of debris underfoot. BTO's last redoubts stand firm, their edges glowing faintly from the heat of continuous fire. The Marines move closer still. The final contest for the island's heart has begun. The collapse of the island's heart. The 2 Marine fire teams advance in parallel lines, their silhouettes drifting through shifting smoke as they push toward the final network of defenses. The air is thick with dust and heat. Every sound is magnified inside this compressed battlefield. The hiss of burning palms, the crack of rifle fire ricocheting off concrete, the hollow thump of distant mortars too far away to matter now. BTO's remaining defenders fight with sharpened intensity. This is the ground they have prepared for the longest, and this is where they expect to die. You hover above the first fire team as it approaches the buried strongpoint. The structure is almost invisible from a distance, its roof layered with palm fronds, netting, and debris. Only the faint movement of air through its firing slit gives away its presence. The Marines fan out behind a rise of broken coral, crouching low as they plan their next motion. A Marine raises his rifle, sending a short suppressive burst into the slit. The defenders respond instantly. Rounds tear through the foliage, kicking up sprays of shredded palm fiber. The blockhouse hums with a vibration of sustained fire, a deep, unsettling resonance that rolls outward in invisible waves. The Marines wait for the slightest pause. Then they move. A smoke grenade arcs upward, landing near the strongpoint's entrance and blooming into a dense, low-lying cloud. The smoke clings to the ground, obscuring the narrow strip of sand between the Marines and the bunker. It is only a partial screen, imperfect, shifting, but enough to fracture the defenders' aim. The Marines surge forward. They slip into the smoke with controlled urgency, pressing low as they advance along the bunker's camouflaged edge. Sand shifts under their boots. Sweat stings their eyes. The heat of the island presses like a weight against their backs. A hand signal. A short halt. A Marine lifts a satchel charge. He plants it against the structure's concealed entrance, wedging it beneath a supporting log. The placement must be precise. Anything else might only crack the exterior. He pulls back quickly, stumbling into the low depression near his squad. The charge detonates with a sharp, concussive roar. The earth jumps. Palm fronds and debris blast outward in a burst of fire and dust. The strongpoint's entrance collapses inward, sending a plume of dirt and ash into the air. For a moment, the firing from within stutters, then stops entirely. The Marines wait. Nothing moves. They proceed inside. The interior is dark, cooler than the island's surface, thick with dust that hangs in the air like fog. It is a cramped space, uneven walls reinforced with logs and sandbags. A corridor splits into two alcoves. One contains a firing cell still warm from recent use. The other holds storage crates scattered across the floor. They clear the bunker methodically. The strong point falls. But the battle is not finished. You drift toward the second fire team, now nearing the pillbox on the flank. The structure is partially buried in a mound of coral, its firing slit aimed directly across the ridge's interior line. Its position is strong, elevated slightly, giving its defenders a clear arc of fire across a wide field. The Marines inch forward along a shallow trench that leads toward the pillbox's blind side. The trench curves gently, offering brief concealment but no true cover. Every movement sends dust drifting upward. The defenders inside the pillbox adjust their aim repeatedly, firing in sharp bursts that skim just over the trench's rim. At the final bend, the Marines pause. The entrance to the pillbox lies around the corner, a narrow, recessed doorway shaded by a canopy of woven fronds. Reaching it means darting across a few feet of open ground directly beneath the firing slit's arc. A risk the defenders rely on. A risk the Marines must take. The lead Marine pulls a smoke grenade from his pouch. He lobs it low and fast. It bursts in a thick, swirling cloud that rolls across the entrance. The moment it expands enough to mask the doorway, the Marines surge forward. Their boots pound the sand in short, measured strides. The firing slit flashes once, a blind burst, desperate and imprecise, but the smoke hides their silhouettes just enough. They reach the pillbox. One Marine braces against the wall beside the entrance. Another prepares to clear the interior. A third pulls a fragmentation grenade, leans forward, and tosses it through the narrow opening. The explosion rolls out in a muted roar, shaking dust from the pillbox's roof. They enter immediately. The interior is dim and angular, a narrow chamber constructed from thick logs and reinforced concrete. A machine gun sits anchored on a central mount, its barrel still warm. Sandbags are piled in a semicircle behind it. Crates lie scattered across the floor. The defenders inside have fallen silent. The Marines secure the pillbox with practiced, methodical movements. When they emerge back into the open air, the battlefield has changed. The final cluster of defenses, the command blockhouse, stands alone now. Smoke drifts around it in curling patterns. The firing from its slit has slowed. Its trench connections have fallen quiet. The heart of BTO is collapsing. The Marines gather, adjusting their gear, exchanging brief nods that hold both exhaustion and determination. They prepare to move on the last strong point, the place where this battle will end. The island seems to exhale, tasting the shift. Victory is not yet here, but its outline is beginning to form through the drifting smoke. Epilogue: The island after the storm. When the final strong point falls, it does so not with spectacle, but with a gradual quieting, a slow, shuddering stillness that rolls outward from the heart of BTO. The blockhouse's last bursts of fire sputter, pause, and then cease altogether. Smoke pours from its slits in thin, wavering strands before dissolving into the heat. Farther down the trench network, muffled echoes fade into silence. The air, thick with dust and exhaustion, finally begins to settle. You drift above the island as the soundscape changes. The deep percussion of rifles softens into intermittent pops carried on the wind. The thud of mortars fades into memory. The rhythm of machine guns, constant for hours, dissolves into an absence so abrupt that it feels unreal. The Marines emerge slowly from their final positions, stepping out of trenches and bunkers with movements heavy from hours of strain. Their uniforms cling to their bodies, damp with sweat, stiff with grit. Some slump into the shade of shattered palms, others drop to one knee in the sand, breathing deeply as if learning the rhythm of quiet again. The island feels smaller now, not because its physical borders have changed, but because the battle has drawn every part of it into sharp relief. Every trench crossed, every bunker breached, every yard of sand fought for beneath relentless heat and fire. The ridge line, once alive with the vibration of guns, stands in uneasy calm. Smoke rises in slow spirals from broken strongpoints, drifting upward like threads unraveling from a frayed cloth. The airfield, bright and blinding only hours earlier, lies quiet beneath a thin veil of dust. The burned palms crackle softly in the wind, their flames dwindling into faint whispers. Here and there, Marines move with quiet purpose, tending to the wounded, marking secured structures, clearing small pockets where defenders hid until the very end. They speak rarely. When they do, their voices are low, shaped by the weight of what they've endured. From your vantage, the island's geometry shifts into something clearer. The trenches resemble veins. The bunkers, organs in a fortified body. The ridgeline, a spine that has endured breaking after breaking until finally giving way. The defenders fought with determination rooted deep in resolve, a quiet, unyielding kind that survived bombardment, flame, and encirclement. And the Marines, pushing through water, smoke, heat, and fear, matched that resolve with steady, deliberate force. Nothing about this victory feels triumphant. It feels earned. It feels heavy. As the sun begins to lower, the island's colors soften. The white-hot coral cools to pale gold. The smoke thins into delicate strands. The palms, blackened and skeletal, sway with the faintest motion, as if acknowledging the end of the storm. The Marines gather near the shoreline, not in formation, but in quiet clusters, leaning against broken logs or sinking slowly into the sand. Some dip their hands into the lagoon, letting the water wash away the grit and heat. Others sit with their backs against the low dunes, staring out at the distant ships anchored beyond the reef. BTO holds its silence. Night comes to BTO without ceremony. There's no slow fade of color, no gentle shift in air. The heat simply loosens its grip, the sky dims by degrees, and what little breeze exists slips across the island in thin, uneven threads. You stand at the edge of the ridge, looking down across the airfield and the shattered grove beyond it, and everything feels strangely suspended, as though the island is holding still just long enough to catch its breath. The daylight had been relentless, but the night, in its own way, is harsher. Out on the flats of the airfield, the coral glows faintly under the moonlight, pale and almost luminous. Shadows stretch long across the ground, angular and sharp, carved by bunkers that now sit quiet. Smoke clings low, drifting in slow ribbons that never rise high enough to escape their own weight. Every breeze pushes them a few feet, then leaves them stranded again. What stands out most is the stillness. Not true silence, the island has never offered that, but a thinning of sound, a widening of space between noises. The distant clatter of shifting debris. The soft collapse of palm ash falling from burned trunks. The low creak of sandbags adjusting inside bunkers where the heat of the day finally begins to bleed out. Marines sit along the ridge in small clusters, their silhouettes outlined softly by the glow of distant lanterns. Some speak quietly, voices barely more than breath. Others rest their heads against their packs, staring at nothing. No one moves quickly anymore. The pace of the day, the frantic pushes, the bursts of tension, all of it has folded into a sort of exhausted equilibrium. You watch their shoulders rise and fall with the rhythm of fatigue, the way their helmets tilt forward when their bodies begin to sway with sleep they cannot quite reach. Below the ridge, The trenches breathe slowly. Heat trapped in coral and sand rises in faint waves, warping the air even in darkness. You can feel the island radiating the day back into the night, a steady warmth that brushes against your legs and clings to your clothes. It feels less like weather and more like memory, the island refusing to let go of what it has seen. Across the ridge line, lanterns flicker within partially collapsed bunkers. Their light is thin, trembling, barely strong enough to illuminate the interior outlines of coconut logs and sand-packed walls. Some bunkers are abandoned now, their entranceways dark and empty. Others still hold movement, the quiet shifting of silhouettes, the faint clink of tools or metal bowls, the soft scraping of sand being cleared to make a place to sit. You sense the Japanese defenders behind those walls, even if you cannot see them clearly. Not as combatants now, but as shapes inside spaces that are too small, too hot, and too tightly bound to the day's violence. There's no shouting, no frantic motion, no sound of coordination. Just the occasional echo of someone adjusting their position, or a lantern being set down gently against a plank. The night narrows the island's scale. BTO feels smaller than ever, a sliver of land caught between a pale sky and a restless sea. You can hear the surf in the distance, faint and steady, the only rhythm that hasn't changed since the first Marines stepped onto the reef. Out beyond the lagoon, ships sit in dark silhouettes against the horizon, anchored pieces of a world that feels impossibly far from this narrow strip of coral. The air above the ridge carries layers of smell: burned palm, hot coral dust, sweat, cordite residue baked into the ground. Even the breeze can't clear it. It just moves the scents around, folding them over each other in shifting strands. A few Marines check their gear, movements slow and deliberate. Not from tension, but from habit, the kind of routine actions that keep hands busy when minds are too tired to think. Rifles are wiped. Canteens lifted, swished, set down again. Helmet straps inspected for fraying. Small motions that speak of endurance more than readiness. Further down the ridge, a corpsman kneels beside a Marine who has fallen asleep sitting upright. He adjusts the man's posture, easing him gently to the ground so his back won't seize by morning. He speaks quietly, though the words don't carry. The gesture is small, but it softens the night around it. You move your gaze across the island again, from the burned palms to the trench lines, from the airfield's pale expanse to the shadows of bunkers that no longer roar with sound. Everywhere you look, the aftermath of the day clings to the landscape, not in violence, but in fatigue. The night does not heal. It simply pauses. It lets everything rest just enough to continue. From somewhere in the grove, a palm trunk cracks and collapses, falling with a dull, heavy thud. No one startles. No one rises. It is just another sound in a place full of them. You realize that this night, this moment, will pass with the same quiet inevitability as the day. Nothing here stops. It only slows. Long enough for breath. Long enough for memory. Long enough to remind you that the island is not merely fought over. It is endured. When dawn comes, the fighting will resume. But for now, BTO rests in the space between exhaustion and resolve, suspended under a sky that offers neither comfort nor threat, only the faint promise of another beginning. The battle is over, but its imprint lingers everywhere, in the trenches cut into the earth, in the scorched bark of fallen palms, in the shapes of craters scattered across the sand like open pages of a story no one intended to write. You drift one final time across the island's length, tracing the path of the fight from shore to ridge to the last strong point. Each place carries its own echo, its own weight. In the quiet that follows, the island feels suspended between worlds, between the violence it has endured and the long, slow healing that will follow. The day ends not with cheers or spectacle, but with tired breaths carried on a cooling wind. BTO exhales, and for the first time in days, the Pacific horizon stands unbroken, soft and still. Aftermath, hell in the palms. When the gunfire finally slips into silence, it feels less like a moment and more like a slow unraveling, a thread pulled loose from a fabric stretched tight for far too long. BTO does not quiet all at once. Its stillness comes in fragments, a lull in the ridge-line trenches, a pause between distant shouts, the sudden absence of the machine guns that had marked nearly every breath since dawn. You drift across the island as the day begins its long descent. The light softens, touching everything with a muted amber glow. The heat lingers, but it no longer presses with the same relentless weight. Smoke unwinds itself from shattered bunkers, turning thin and pale as it rises toward the dimming sky. In the aftermath, the island feels smaller, as though the battle has pulled its edges inward, reshaping it into a single memory that sits quietly under the palms. The trenches are still warm from the friction of movement. The airfield gleams faintly beneath a layer of dust settled by retreating winds. Burned palms sway in slow, uneven arcs, their charred fronds whispering along the ground. Marines move through the stillness with a kind of measured gentleness. Some gather beside the bunkers they had fought so hard to reach, leaning against cool concrete as if relearning the rhythm of rest. Others sit near the lagoon, staring at the water that had carried them toward the island under fire. A few kneel in silence, tracing small circles in the sand with their fingertips, not fully aware they are doing it. There is no single expression shared among them, only fatigue, relief, and the quiet weight of understanding that the island they stand upon has taken something from them, even as they have claimed it. You drift toward the ridge, now fully in shadow. From here, the island unspools in a soft panorama. The broken grove, the long line of white coral runway, the palms leaning inward as if listening. The battle's noise feels impossibly distant, as though it belongs to another place entirely. What remains is a landscape holding its breath, waiting to understand itself again. A Marine sits alone beside the mortar pit captured hours earlier. He lifts a handful of sand, letting it fall slowly from his palm. The grains skim across his boot before the wind takes them. He does not speak. He simply watches the sand fall over and over, as though measuring time by the smallest fragments he can hold. Near the command blockhouse, medics move with soft steps. Their voices are low, steady, threaded with a tenderness that stands in quiet contrast to the violence the island has just endured. They pass bandages from hand to hand, kneeling beside men who breathe in shallow, exhausted rhythms. Even here, even now, the work continues, gentle, necessary, human. The sun lowers further. The lagoon catches the last of the light, turning into a sheet of gold flecked with shadow. The tide shifts, washing through the reef with a soft, pulsing hush, the same reef that had halted the landing craft, the same one that had forced the Marines into the long, exposed walk that shaped the battle's beginning. Now, the water moves as it always has, unhurried, unafraid, unchanged. You drift above the shoreline where footprints overlap in wandering patterns, some rushing inland, some returning to the water, some tracing small circles where men had paused to breathe. The tide reaches for them one by one, pulling their outlines gently back into the sea. Night begins to settle, not harshly, not swiftly, but in a gradual dimming that wraps the island in a softer palette. Purple gathers along the horizon. Stars appear in faint specks. Smoke thins until it becomes indistinguishable from the evening haze. Lanterns flicker to life in scattered clusters across the beach, their glow trembling in the wind. The palms, stripped and blackened, stand like silent silhouettes. Their shadows stretch long across the sand, crossing the footprints and the scattered debris, touching even the edges of the bunkers that still hold the day's heat. In this moment, BTO feels suspended, not victorious, not defeated, but simply present. A place trying to understand the shape of what has passed through it. You rise once more, taking in the whole island, small, scarred, and strangely beautiful in the tenderness of dusk. The silence that settles now is not empty. It is layered with everything the day contained: fear, endurance, loss, courage, exhaustion, and the long exhale that comes after surviving something immense. And as the final light fades, the island holds its quiet. You've been part of Echoes of War, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.